Welcome to State of the State. I'm John Calavali, conducting this interview with another candidate for U.S. Congress. And this is part of the Don Gill Memorial Candidate Interview Series. Welcome to State of the State, John Matson.
John O. Matson.
John O. Matson. What's the significance of O, John?
Well, I think that if John O. Pastori, a good hard-working man, bricklayer, could make it into the Congress, that John O. Matson, the carpenter, could make it into the Congress and represent the people in the 2nd District as well as John O. Pastori done, I would never have to worry about what I did as a congressman.
We had a painter that served in Congress.
Eddie Beard was probably the first time that I actually voted for a candidate for Congress knowing what I was voting for. I remember because he excited me because he came from the blue-collar world as I do, and he sparked my interest in government at that time. And not ever knowing that I would ever run for Congress, John, but it's been quite an awakening since I've started this process back in 1996.
You know, John, I've probably never told you this, but I have an especially high regard for carpenters. Carpenters are the kind of people that create things with their hands, and they can see what the end product will be in their mind. And sometimes, as you know, as a carpenter, you run against a problem, and you have to problem solve right at the moment because you have a job to get done, it's usually time limited, etc., etc. Is that generally true about carpenters?
Well, you'd find that amongst all the tradesmen. I've been a machinist. I ran a gas station and I handled $1 million of cash a year and didn't lose any. I wonder how the government loses our money sometimes. It's to be well-rounded and balanced. I've started an engineering firm in my career, which is AutoCAD driven and GPS and works off satellites. So the technology has gone way past me and my time, but it's okay. It's a boon to the future, and it's simplified a lot of things that used to take an awful lot of effort. But you asked me once why I run, and I think I've clarified that in the last election cycle.
You know, John, you not only clarified it, you clarified it with, and from my perspective, in somewhat of a, not only a personal way, but a poetic way. So yes, tell our viewers why John O. Matson is running for Congress.
Well, most people have never heard from me in my time. They've seen my signs on the street, and I've put the majority of those up and created them. But in 1986, my daughter Julie lost her life while serving in the U.S. Navy. Her godfather, my best friend, lost his life in 1966 while serving in Vietnam. So I always thought that I would want to step up and do something to serve my country. And so when I put my 2 signs on the truck and started running, I had a commitment which you can't buy at the store. It had nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. I had a desire to make a difference, to let them know that somebody's caring for their democracy that they gave their lives for. And when one suffers that type of trauma, I can't explain what it does, but I do know that even today that as our congressmen, senators send our children off to war in Afghanistan, and nowadays it's they send off grandmothers, grandfathers. So this war has become something that the people never voted for nor funded, but it's something we have. And so I think having someone like myself that understands the ramifications of doing the things we've done, I could vote on it and speak to it in a way that few men in our Congress or women in our Congress could do. And so it gives me the strength and the stick-to-itiveness to keep going, not to quit, just to keep fighting and believing in what I'm doing, and that's what I'm doing. That's why I think we've come to meet up again 14 years later, John, since our first go-round, I guess you might call it.
That's right. It's been a while since you've been on State of the State.
Yeah, we were up at the Rhode Island College, I think, I don't know if we shot the show up there or not. I know we were
It's
up there.
been so long, John, that I've forgotten, and of course I'll remind our viewers that we are celebrating 20 years of public access programming. So State of the State has been around a while, and so has John Matson. And you know, John, when I mention to people, because people will ask me, who's on the show next week? Who do you have coming up? And I mention your name. And every one of them said, oh yeah, John Matson, the Independent. Let's get some clarity here. Is it John Matson, the Independent?
Well, I've been going to all the gun clubs in Rhode Island, and I'm passing out these Hunter fact packets. And on this, it says that John O. Matson is running as a Democrat in the Democratic primary on September 11th. And the election will be clarified on that day as to who's going to go on to face the Republican nominee. But that puts you, excuse me, John, for interrupting, that puts you in a primary with the incumbent from the 2nd District, that's Jim Langevin. I'm looking forward to the challenge, as I have in the past. I haven't, backed away from it. But I believe that 20,000 votes are possible for me in this next election cycle in the primary. And why do I believe that? Because in the last election cycle, which I participated as an independent in, I got 14,700 votes. What was historic about the election is Jim Langevin fell below 60% of the votes in that election for the first time since he ran. So I think there are enough people out there who are dissatisfied with what Jim has done or don't know what he's done, that I think that we can round up 20,000 votes and control who's going to be the next nominee for the Democratic Party. He has never been out in the workplace like I have and suffered or started businesses as an entrepreneur, as I have been. And so Jimmy, although he had a tragic accident, and I wish that on nobody, and he's done marvelous with this situation, and I'm proud of him and anybody that climbs out of that and becomes what he done.
Yes, indeed.
But coming from the farm, I know that in Congress, people stay there 20 or 40 years, John. And they become part of the problem because they stay too long. Our founders started it as the farmers and those in the country would go serve for 2-4 years and go home and go back to work. It's become a country club for them, and that's how I see it. I see that we've lost control of our government. The parties themselves control it. It's not controlled by the people. So my candidacy is I'm running for the people in the sense that I don't want to get on there and spend 20 years. Term limits are needed drastically to stop the power grabs of what takes place in Congress. When one runs a farm or any type of growing operation, you have to rotate your crops in the soil. You can't.
Absolutely,
you cannot leave the same. You can't grow corn in the field for 20 years. The soil becomes acidic. So it's just time that Jimmy moved on. He said since 1986 he's been involved in government as a rep or as a Secretary of State or as a congressman. I feel that it's time for some fresh ideas, some fresh blood, some fresh energy, and I think I bring that to the table. I think
John, I love your analogy. You do have to rotate the crops. And nothing against Congressman Langevin.
No, that's nothing.
He's scheduled for an interview on State of the State in June, and his interview will be broadcast shortly thereafter. But I think that you've probably hit on the essential problem that we have in Washington, D.C., where we are, in fact, not rotating the crops.
Yeah, when you see there are people who have been in Congress for 40 years. I mean, you lose all your perspective if you do something too long. It doesn't matter what it is. You've got to refresh yourself, and I just don't see that happening. When I'm out in the community, I went over to the John O. Pastore Center where they run the DREAM operation for MS. They take care of and assist people who have MS the other day, and I spoke, and I just don't see the change, and I feel the need for change, and for people to reach out. The hunting and fishing, which my son's a hunter, so I brought this up, and I'm out going to the hunting clubs because there are 86,000 hunters and fishermen in the state of Rhode Island. Well, what does that mean? That means
Yes,
that if,
what does that mean?
That means that they're contributing $176 million to our economy every year. That means that they because of the money they spend, that they employ more people than the University of Rhode Island, according to the fact sheets. So those people, they're not counted as hunters they're counted as tourism. But few people know what the hunters and fishermen have done for this country, and that's why I passed this packet out, is they support the DEM here in Rhode Island. I think last year they got, because of the Pittman-Bowes Act and all the excise taxes that are collected, they have actually brought $6 million into the DEM's budget out of the $8.5 million they spend. So when people say that the first conservationists were the hunters and fishermen on Long Island in 1844, when they started buying open space and marshes, and since then they've spent $17 billion buying open space in America. That's millions of acres have been purchased by the hunters and the fishermen to protect our environment.
John, thank you for educating us about that. That's a very interesting perspective, and I will humble myself and admit to it that I never thought of it in those terms before, but you have added a different perspective to my consciousness. Thank you very much. John, let's talk about some of the other issues. There was an article in the Providence Journal this week, the 24th of April, Social Security in trouble. And this article is suggesting that Social Security may run out of money by 2033. John, I am one of those Social Security recipients. Tell us what your perspective is on this trouble that we're facing with Social Security.
Well, for the last 20 years, John, since I've met you, we've heard the same story over and over again, and it always comes up just before the election cycle.
Yes,
isn't that ironic that
not at all
they write about it? Okay, so it's just like the pension system in my town, in Woonsocket, in Providence. You can only give away so much, and at some point in time the well's going dry, and that's what's happened. With Social Security, as you know, there's 10,000 baby boomers like me and you retiring every day.
And we're living longer.
And we're living longer.
Knock on wood.
And there's nobody to replace us now. Our Congress, our senators, our presidents have all totally failed to put any stopgaps on this measure for the last 30 years. I don't know exactly what it's going to take to fix it. But if you read it, it also says that at that point in time they will automatically cut back on the payments to those who are paid in. We have to stop spending the money all over our government processes, the duplications. How many times have we heard that a program has outlived its efficiency and time, but nobody can shut it down?
Well, that's an interesting question, John. Some people are proposing, and I'll ask you what your position is on some of these proposals. Some people are suggesting that as we go forward, we need to change the age of retirement. So you know what that means, that we will need to be older before we can officially retire and collect Social Security. What's your position on that?
The intent was originally that when our life expectancy was 68, I believe, for an average man when Social Security was enacted. We're now up to 80.
Yep.
To have that 6,000 days of retirement for an average, to be able to enjoy our older years is something that we all need to try to protect. But we have to change how the process works, because the process has gone by its original foundation. We have to put another foundation underneath Social Security. The one that was erected when it was enacted no longer fits the job. Yeah. It's not big enough to carry us forward, and they haven't done it. I mean,
well, some people also believe, John, that people who earn a certain amount of income should not be able to collect Social Security, whatever that limit might be. It might be 200,000, it might be $1 million. Do you have any thoughts on eliminating it for people earning high incomes?
And I think an American is American, and because somebody succeeded, they should have all the benefits of health care and all the things we have. I think we should have a system in place that's fair to everybody. No class of people should be struck down because of their success or failure for success. I mean, because it's a double-edged sword. We can't, once again, the foundation for Social Security was based on X. It's now Y. It doesn't fit. So we have to adjust the term and the rates and the amount of money contributed, the time to enact. You only have to look at the pensions that we give out today to our public employees. They can work 20 years and retire with 50% benefits. They ride on our backs for 40 years. They go get another job. It's just non-sustainable process that has to be fixed.
So I take it you're supportive of the recent changes that have been made in the state of Rhode Island to the public employees' retirement system.
I haven't studied them case by case. I just know that watching my little town of Hopkinton, who was giving away 3.5% compounded COLAs with the highest one-year pay to our police officers, is non-sustainable. I went to Governor Kacheri, I went to his chief of staff, I went to Mr. Kapersky at the retirement board, and I couldn't get any answers. I was stonewalled at every step. Mr. Kacheri's chief of staff, the lawyer, said the only thing I could do about the pension that was passed illegally, as I found to be in Hopkinton, because they didn't follow the statute, he said I had to sue the House and the Senate. That's not an option for the local citizen to sue the government. But so, do I understand the severity of the pension crisis? I have understood it. When my daughter was council president, she was grappling with that way back in 2000 in Hopkinton. So I did wrap my arms around Hopkinton's situation, and I tried to change it, and I ran into the same battle zone as every other town has. But it's changing. It's just a battle that has to be won. The people cannot sustain that type of giveaway.
I think, John, that most people would agree with you on that matter. John, I found it interesting, and I'm going to encourage people to visit your website to look at the brief history of the income tax that you provide there. I found it very interesting. And it was kind of like a refresher course in history when I was reading that. What is John Matson's view on the income tax?
Well, the income tax, I think that if anybody would ask an accountant what's going on with the income tax when it comes time to pay, I think there are more pages there than any man can read. I don't think there's any average citizen could ever understand the income tax laws. They're so complex. I think the special interests, which I understand there's 6,000 lobbyists in Washington, have passed more rules and regulations to benefit themselves than the average citizen could ever fathom. I think that when I was up in New Hampshire with the flat tax boys, Mr. Forbes and others, that I thought it was a genuine idea whose time had come. I still think it has. First off, it would eliminate the $50 billion IRS operating budget. We wouldn't be throwing people in jail because it'd be a consumption tax. Yeah. I just don't. I think we spend so much money collecting our money, and so many people don't pay their proportional share. That the Buffett rules have been in the Senate lately that Mr. Whitehouse entered. Well, it's all well and fine, but if you read back to the history of the income tax, they only taxed the top 1%, and yes, they taxed them 1%.
Yes.
And that was the whole gist of the income tax. But it's crept in. Now we've got a phone tax, we got a water tax, we got a candy tax, we got a soda tax. I mean, the government just kept taking. I don't feel the services have stayed up with the amount of money they take from us. I think that it's just gotten out of control, and I think the flat tax truly was a way to try to solve it. So.
Mm-hmm. And so is that something that you would work for if you were in Congress?
Yeah, I would work for it to amend the to put an amendment into Congress to eliminate the taxes, the income tax, would probably won't take place in my lifetime, but I would start on
if at all.
If at all, yes, I agree. But I mean, it's like no one can understand it. You take accountants that can't understand. I mean, CPAs, some of the brightest 2% of the people in the world, who actuaries have trouble wrapping their hands around all the issues that have been.
And some of us everyday Americans have trouble just negotiating the forms, let alone understanding the tax law in and of itself. John, I know that you have some concerns about health care and paying for health care. I wonder if you would tell us what your concerns are. We are living with health care reform that has been given the name Obamacare,
yes.
And a number of people who have appeared on this show and been interviewed have expressed their opposition to Obamacare. What's your position?
I initially was against Obamacare because of what I've been told. But I've come to think there's a lot of pieces of the Obamacare which need to be incorporated into the American system, like pre-existing conditions people can't get covered. I mean, they're just left on the street. They can't get coverage for drastic. That's one good part of it. I can't tell you that I've studied the 2,500 pages or whatever they've added to it, but I know that they ran a show with on The Rock last night about health care, where citizens go into the hospital and have no health care, and they've been stuck in the hospital for a year and a half. The bill is $1.4 million. They can't let them out because they have no place to go. They don't have health care. They can't go to a nursing home because Medicaid won't cover it. So they've spent $1,400,000 taking care of one person who just rides back and forth in the hospital day in and day out because they can't discharge her. She has no place to go. So the system is so broken that they can't fix a simple thing. They can't, can't take a piece of it and take care of that lady. They did eventually, and another lady, they shipped her back to Poland, I believe, because that's the only place that she could. She wasn't a native to the country. She had worked as a house cleaner in Chicago for 20 years, and her bill was in the hundreds of thousands, and they couldn't get her out of here. There was nobody to take care of her, nobody capable, no money to do it. So they did get her back. Her son took her back to Poland, and put her in a facility there. But the system, when there's thousands, and they said in the article that I got here, there's thousands of them cases in America.
Yes, there are.
And it's just how we as a country can't solve a simple problem.
It's perplexing.
It truly is.
John, I get the sense that you generally are supportive to the notion that we should have a national health care system that works better than what you've been just describing.
Yes.
And is affordable. So how do we pay for it, I guess, is the critical question.
I've talked to 5 doctors, and I'll be going to my doctor for my regular checkup tomorrow. And I've asked him, I've asked Dr. Yolen, other doctors in the Westerly area. They do not give me an answer. They can't give me an answer. So it's something that somebody with more information about the problems that they face on a day-to-day basis, somebody has to have an answer. I mean, nobody can know everything. I know that Henry Ford, when he hired Edison and everybody around him, he brought the smartest people he could gather to solve the problem. And I know the problem can be solved, just like we solved the problem of going to the moon. We got there.
We did.
We did, and I'm sure that we can solve the healthcare issue. I mean, there's battles going on about the Canadian model, the French model, the Denmark model, but somewhere there's got to be a happy medium that's affordable so that we can have health care. I went to...
Well, I suppose the basic question for me, John, is that as long as our health care system is driven by insurance companies, we will never have a solution to this problem.
And I think you're right, and simply because they control Washington.
Indeed.
The banks, the insurance companies have controlled Washington. If you look at the consolidation of the 34 largest banks, we just went through the big crisis, which people are paying with their homes, their lives. They've been 30 million Americans have lost everything they ever owned or worked hard for. It isn't, these aren't bad people. These people got hung up in a system that doesn't work for them. And the crisis we're going through, this recession, is still just as real today to somebody losing their house tomorrow as it
Indeed.
was 3 years ago.
You know, John, I've just been given the sign that we're probably approaching the 4-minute mark. And so I want to really approach the remaining 4 minutes this way. What do you want to tell the people watching this show about John Matson and what he will do if he's elected to Congress?
If elected, I will give the people of Rhode Island a voice that they can truly count on. Somebody that'll come stand on a street with those to fight the battles that affect you here every day. It's awful important to think that far away in Washington is any smarter than the people that in your neighborhood is wrong. The people in the neighborhood know what's wrong with their town, their city. We need to be able to take the same common sense approach and go to Washington and fix it. Well, Virginia Raimondo has taken on the toughest task, being pension in Rhode Island, and started to turn the corner with it. The same type of tenacity has to go to Washington to take on the problems that are facing our U.S. government. And the one thing I promise is, given the ability to go there full time and analyze that, John Matson will go do the job. And so I ask you for your vote on September 11th in the primary against Jim Langevin. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. And if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you just a few quick questions. Sure. We recently went through redistricting in the state of Rhode Island. Many people voiced objections to the system. Do you think that the redistricting process should be taken out of the hands of elected officials? I
do. I think that Mr. Brace spent $700,000 to move 5,000 people to realign the district here in the 2nd district because there was an imbalance. It was a fiasco, the battle lines over various districts. It's pure politics at its finest. The disruption, moving one guy right out of a district where he was a rep. How can you do this? But I guess that's politics. So politics isn't a nice game. It's a very nasty game as it's played. I believe harmony is the strength and support of all institutions. And if we can't have harmony, we'll never have a government that represents the people.
Good point, John. John, Operation Clean Government has been working to have the powers of the Ethics Commission restored. The Ethics Commission had a setback out of a case in the Rhode Island Supreme Court. And what this means is that the Ethics Commission no longer has jurisdiction over legislators. Do you think it should?
Oh, it should, totally. I think Jimmy Langevin is having a fundraiser on the 3rd to retire the debt from his campaign for Secretary of State, which was 12 years ago. How can anybody not pay his debts from 12 years ago because the Ethics Committee has no power? They need to be empowered to make people pay up the, when they do something wrong. I mean, I don't know, here we are 12 years later, I got the invitation today. He's holding it to retire the debt from his Secretary of State's run. Now, why wasn't it paid?
That's interesting.
I mean, that's like,
well, John,
the Ethics Commission would take care of that.
John, thank you so much for coming in to State of the State. We've been talking with John O. Matson, who's running as a Democrat for the 2nd Congressional District.
Yes. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you for having me in.
You are welcome, John. And please join us again next time for another edition of State of the State. Thank you for watching.